Hey, everybody. Scott Luton with you here on Veteran Voices. Welcome to today's episode. We got a special guest host with me today, Dan Reeve, dear friend with Esker. Dan, how you doing?
All good. Nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back. I tell you, you're rocketing up the charts in terms of being a repeat guest here on Supply
Right.
Chain Now and Veteran Voices programming. And I appreciate you connecting us with our guest today, which we're going to share more on in just a moment. So, Dan, are you ready to dive into all the goodness we've got teed up here today on Veteran Voices?
Yep. Ready to rock and roll.
All right. So a few programming notes before we get started, folks. So Veteran Voices is part of Supply Chain Now family of programming. We conduct the show in partnership with our dear friends at Vets to Industry. .org. Great nonprofit doing great work for our veteran community, and I believe they're about to go international. So a lot of even more growth and good things for what they're doing for veterans. So learn more at vets2industry.org. Also, big thanks to our friends that sponsor Veteran Voices episodes, Buyers Meeting Point and Dial P for procurement. Big thanks to Kelly Barner and our friends over there. So check them out at buyersmeetingpoint.com. Okay. So Dan, let's introduce our guest today. We've enjoyed our pre-show conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest. So we're going to be interviewing a fellow veteran entrepreneur and U.S. Marine. In fact, our guest is a gifted storyteller who consistently inspires audiences to break down barriers and run through walls. Our guest is regularly asked to share his powerful story of a 20-year career overcoming adversity and personal challenges. And now, outside of leading his own business, which he founded, our guest gives back as a mentor, trusted advisor, and coach. So join me in welcoming Mr. Raleigh Wilkins, founder and CRO with Sales Platoon. Raleigh, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you asking me to be on your show.
You bet. Your ears have been burning. Beyond Dan singing your praises, we've done our homework around here, and I think a lot of folks are big members of the Raleigh Wilkins fan club. So great to have you here.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's glad to be here.
All right. So, Dan, we want to start with kind of just getting to know Raleigh a little more, right? We want to find out one of my favorite questions to ask because I think it connects people, especially as humans. And Raleigh, that is, where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, I grew up all throughout Virginia, rural part, so small towns. We didn't have any. I think we had two traffic lights in the one I grew up in, and then we graduated to a bowling alley in Franklin, Virginia. So it was small town America at its best, for sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Now, Franklin, Virginia, if I'm directionally, is that south, north? Where's that?
It's in the southeast corner of Virginia, so it's right on the North Carolina border, a stone's throw from, North Carolina, and then about an hour west of Virginia Beach.
Okay. Now I got to ask you, Dan and I love talking about food on plenty of our shows. And if you're near the border of North Carolina, then barbecue immediately comes to my mind.
Oh, sure.
But
Yeah.
what was a big part of your childhood from a food standpoint?
Oh yeah, I mean barbecue for sure, venison, which most people in cities never eaten, but we had in venison barbecue. But peanuts is big down there, huge. It's a war among peanuts manufacturers down there, and so I personally align with Hub's Peanuts. They're a small local roastery. I actually sent Dan some after we met. Yeah, really good. So, but anyway, so peanuts. I always think every time I come home, I load up the car. So,
all right. So Dan, I got to ask, I put you on the spot. Are we talking boiled peanuts, roasted peanuts? What did you eat?
Well, he's actually sent me a couple of these tins, and it's funny when he first sent me peanuts. I'm thinking, peanuts? Why are you sending? So now I realize it's kind of a cultural, traditional gift. And one of my close friend who I'm rock climbing with tomorrow is from Virginia too. So I'm actually going to take one of the tins of peanuts because we've talked. I got talking to him and said, "So what's the deal with Virginia and peanuts?" And he, "Oh yeah, that's a big thing. When you were a kid, you'd treat to go to the peanut store." And maybe you got to do that, He says he grew up poor, and he says, but that was a treat every once or a couple of weeks. Maybe your family would be able to afford. You'd go to the peanut store and have just visiting. It was a real traditional thing. So I'm gonna treat him to some of your peanuts tomorrow.
Okay.
You get hungry, so
I love it. I love it. All right. So, and we should probably, for our audience that maybe didn't catch your earlier episodes with us, Dan, you're also a veteran, served in the Royal British Army, as well as the Wisconsin National Guard, right?
Yeah, so so I served in the British Army. Effectively, the unit or the corps that I was in was the Royal Engineers. So helping the army move, fight, survive, and also lots of time serving with the Americans. So borrowing stuff, begging, stealing. Well, always some bartering and trading going on.
Any peanuts involved in those negotiations?
I don't remember peanuts. So I remember being on Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, and I think it was a U.S. Marine was saying, "Well, do you want to trade? I can trade these munitions, but I'd like your webbing." And I'm thinking, it's an interesting offer, but I need back. And my regimental sergeant major might have questions about where's my webbing gone. I need that 6 months, for example. So very generous of you, but I'm going to have to decline. So yeah, I really enjoyed that the opportunity to see how the different units meshed. I did get sick in Iraq, and a U.S. field some beautiful ladies at U.S. Field Hospital took care of me. It was really, really, really good people. Those ladies did a great job. I was not very well, so I really got to see great hospitality from the American forces. In the end, I got loaned to the American forces. 18 months, which was brilliant. Walking around in Wisconsin with a British uniform, and nobody knew who I was or what rank I was. It was awesome. But I learned something in that exercise, which is sometimes, you always assume our process, my unit is better than everybody else, and when you do get loaned out to a different unit or a different army, even, well, you learn different things, and you learn to appreciate actually the Wisconsin National Guard, the Army National Guard. They've got some really good drills and skills. They've really learned some things in Iraq, and so that was a really good exercise to learn that, hey, you've got to be open to sort of learning best practices wherever they may come from.
I'm with you, and I appreciate that. You dropped a lot of truths there. I most appreciate the fact you got us connected here with Raleigh, and we're going to be able to dive in his story. So back to Franklin, Virginia. So we've established the peanuts and the value of those peanuts. And I can relate. I grew up in South Carolina, old peanuts, roasted peanuts. It was definitely a part of that upbringing. Now, one other thing before I throw it over to Dan and we talk more about your time as a in active duty with the U.S. Marine Corps. What else was a big part of growing up all around Virginia?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Virginia is such a diverse state. It's almost like a country. You get from the beach to the mountains, and so you kind of can play on both sides. And I don't know if it was growing up in Nags Head and going down to North Carolina and running through those sand dunes. And I had an uncle who was a Marine, and I think that formulated some early thoughts in my head. But my other uncle owned a bunch of Dairy Queens. And Dairy Queen's big in the South. That's like a date night, And so I had a card that allowed. I still have one. Thanks, Uncle Mitch. Where I can eat for free at any of his Dairy Queens, and he's been successful. So a lot of them. So I was a heavy kid. I sat down. I added up the calories. I think I was eating close to 8,000 calories a day sometimes between my mom's cooking and his Dairy Queen. So.
But it was just so good. It was just so good. You're
so
right.
Good.
That is date night in the South. And one last point, you made it clear pre-show, you're a big Chicago Bears fan, and I think there's a lot of Americans, maybe a lot of global sports followers that also are maybe. I'm a bandwagon Bears fans from time to time, so we're all rooting for the Bears to get back. And it looks like they've got a new quarterback regime, so we'll see what happens in the upcoming season. So, but big. How long have you been following the Bears?
Yeah, since '86. I mean, two things happened, and we got cable TV in Franklin, Virginia, and that enabled us to get WGN and WTBS. It was either the Braves or the Cubs, and it was either the Bears and Atlanta at the time didn't really have a team. So
that's right.
Yes.
Hey, the Falcons are still trying to come back from that fourth quarter meltdown that broke a lot of our hearts here. But nevertheless, okay. Yeah. So now that we've covered where you're from, we've covered food, and now we've covered football. Dan, why don't we dive into his background with the Marines, huh?
Yeah. So, Raleigh, one of the things that I came to learn was that the Marines, the U.S. Marines Air Wing, is actually larger than all the aircraft in the combined forces in the UK. So clearly a big organization. For those who don't know, actually, what's interesting right now is the newest carrier that's just been deployed, HMS Queen Elizabeth II, is full of F-35s. Half the squadron is Marine Corps, half the squadron is Royal Air Force and Royal Navy. So I imagine the US Marines love the fact that they can have a couple of beers every night, because or a rum. They're probably not used to doing that when they're on the Eisenhower or the Nimitz, but on our carriers they can have a few sherbets. So, but back to the story, I don't know if you were on a carrier or I believe you traveled around. What was your MOS? What was your role or roles? Where did you serve?
Yeah, so I was all over, but my main deployment was out to Japan. So I spent 2 years out there, lived out there, was with the 1st Marine Air Wing out there in WHS-1. It was a helicopter squadron. Our commander was a Harrier pilot, and then came back stateside. And so I was a 4341 combat journalist when I came back. So Private Joker from Full Metal Jacket, that was my MOS, if you've seen that old movie.
Right.
But yeah, and so I came back to the stateside. They put me in Richmond, back in Virginia, at I&I duty. So instructor staff with Battery H314 artillery battery. And so that was an interesting experience to go from the wing in Japan to the artillery battery. So
now, how far when you went back to Richmond? How far were you from your folks?
I wasn't too far. I was close enough that I was far enough away they didn't expect me home for dinner, but close enough I can go there on the weekend. So Perfect. It was, yeah, it was good. And just like Dan said, one of the things that was great about being stationed in one of those independent duty stations is nobody knows. It's terrible to be a Marine on active duty at the base. I mean, you go off base and it's just, you got all the negativity of what people's unconscious bias against the military is. You get to go somewhere nobody knows the Marines, and it's like you walk down the street in a uniform on the way to work, and it's like, man, it was what I joined. It's like, all right, this is a little better, a little better treatment than what's your rank and what kind of car can you afford.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Dan, I got to say that is one of the first times that's come up one of our podcasts. But as I'm thinking back, just as Raleigh shares that, I think there is quite a bit of that unconscious bias and assumptions and stereotyping that goes on in these military towns at times, right? Not to generalize too much, but I remember Raleigh and Dan. When I was in the Air Force first time, I was probably 18. I was 19 when I hit my first permanent duty station at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. Got one of my first cars, and I completely backed into like this really nice Nissan 300Z or something, some nice sports car. The lady got out of it and she let me have it. And probably some of that unconscious bias came right out of her, because I was in uniform at lunch. But, kidding aside, that is something we have to break through, not only while you're serving, but as we'll talk about here soon, the transition, right? As folks try to understand what you do and what you're good at and what you did in the military. So, all right. So Dan, where are we going next with Raleigh?
Well, I think the thing we're going to talk about is folks that made an impression. When I think you asked me this question, Scott, and you said, were there a couple of people that really helped shape you, or were there people that really stood out from your time in the military? And I talked about one of my staff sergeants who acted a little bit like a father figure, and made sure my behavior, attitude, and technique were always improving, and especially my attitude was where it needed to be. A really good father figure, John Patterson. I'll give him a shout out. He became Sergeant Major of my squadron later. So, Raleigh, I think my turn to throw the question to you. I mean, are there people from the military that I don't know, for one reason or another, they really stood out, they really had an impact on you?
Yeah, there's a couple, and I was thinking back to that first command, and it was a Lieutenant Colonel Holcomb. And for being a young enlisted guy, he was at my first command. Similar to you, we had some interaction where we ended up hitting it off, and he was always kind of looking out for me. And he would give me books to read, and one of those was Joe Galloway's book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And so it was, he got my interest peaked, and I think he saw something in me. So he kept pushing me to do different things, go to meritorious boards, which I did and won, compete in different things, try out for the Force Recon NDOC, which I did. All these different things he pushed for, and then the commissioning program. So he was really instrumental in getting me like he saw something, a spark in me, and pushed it, and and encouraged me. And of course, from there, other people kind of jumped on too. And it was very interesting coming from the background that I did to all of a sudden find myself in the situation where people were really supportive and wanted me and saw something in me that I hadn't even seen in myself.
And that, that is one of the beautiful things, at least during my time as well, that not just the camaraderie, but beyond that, oftentimes who you're reporting to, they're trying to find those special gifts and talents, and trying to look after you so that you can advance and maybe make rank earlier. And it sounds like that's what it was. Was it Colonel Holcomb you said there,
Mm-hmm.
Raleigh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he played a
Yeah.
big role there. Who else comes to mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was really instrumental. There was a warrant officer, and I knew you were going to ask me, and then I drew a blank on his name right when you said it. But I knew him when he was a staff sergeant, and he was the guy that he was the fastest runner in the battalion. And so, it was when you get there, you got to make up your mind if you're going to push yourself or not when you get in the fleet force. And I decided I was, and so I was going to catch him and Corporal Kang. And he was, damn, I just had his name in my head too. I just forgot it again when I said it. But he was relentless, man. He wouldn't. There's no such thing as letting you win. Like we'd be in the last 300 yards of a 7-mile run, and he'd still be pushing it all the way. And he would always win. And then he'd kind of look back and laugh, and said, "Piss me off." So I'd go run and try to beat him. I finally beat him, But then he went off to Chief Warrant Officer school and became Chief Warrant Officer. So he'd probably beat me now in a foot race. but it's just,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's just people like that, there was so many people, along the way that, and we don't have a lot of time to get into background and all, but I mean, I'm not a traditional background guy to go in the military. I went in, I was a junior in college at Old Dominion University. But I had, by the time I was 15, I was incorrigible. My mom didn't know what to do with me, single family. Single mother. My uncle was trying to help out my grandmother, but I was in the foster care system by the time I was 15. And
wow.
And when I was 16, I stood in front of a judge and they gave me away. And so by the time I was 20, I was headed for a life of, I don't know, mediocrity and kind of a last gasp self effort. It was the Marine Corps came in and saved my life. No doubt about it that I would have a completely different life if I had not joined the Marine Corps and gotten through boot camp. And then these people started seeing things in me that people in high school weren't seeing in me, even in college. And it was like, wait, maybe I do have some worth. Maybe I do have some value. Maybe I can become something in this life beyond just, an hourly worker, or there's nothing wrong with that. It's noble work, but it's like I didn't have that belief in myself. And so the Marine Corps was one of those things where it was a great equalizer. You get the same pay, same haircut, same uniform, and you really just get to test the mettle of an individual, and you find yourself out.
I agree with that. I mean, I had an experience where when I went to university, at the same time I began I joined the effectively it was called the Territorial Army, which is the reserves, the British Army Reserves. And one of the first things that I said is, okay, I want to be. They're big into mountaineering, climbing, outdoor sports in general, as a way of, you can't always be training for war, but you can be getting fit and learning to work well as a team and putting yourself through difficult circumstances. That all translates. And they put me straight through. I wanted to go and do the mountaineering course. And they're like, yeah, but first you can do something for us. And they threw me into the Army's physical training instructor school, which I didn't consider myself good enough, strong enough, fit enough to go and do that. And they were, you'd hear these horror stories. Oh, this is everybody goes on a course in the Army. Oh, everybody blows it up. And then you go and do it. And you're like, they sort of said, we think you could do it. We think you could pass. Train, go and do it. I loved it. I hadn't been a gifted athlete at school. I mean, I think since then, if anything, all the mountaineering and everything that I do nowadays, it was, they added the fuel to my rocket. I just didn't have at school. Suddenly, it was like, I believe in myself. Suddenly, I'm doing stuff that's longer, harder than anything I know others are doing, because the Army pushed me there and said, go do it. And yes, then you get to do all these other doors will open for you. So I think when we talk about hiring, I think when we get into talking about hiring veterans, they've often, think about Goggins, some of you read his book, The Navy SEAL, David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me. Most of them have got a cookie jar. And what I mean by that is there's stuff they've done in the military that they can tap into when times are hard or it's going to take a lot more effort. They've done some stuff they can root into and go, yep, I've been pushed, I've been tested before, I can go there again. And I think that's always interesting for me, that's one of the things the veteran brings, is they've probably been pushed and tested and put through the crucible. Sounds like you probably had some of that as well in Raleigh.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Dan, because I tend to agree with you. So Raleigh, clearly, as you were transitioning from a really tough, you called it incorrigible, which is such a great word, and as you were going through, it sounds like the foster care system and then the Marines. And it seems like that structure initially and the support you got from a supervisory standpoint, where they were looking to see how they could, find, not find your purpose, but find your talents, find your gifts. It sounds like that was really instrumental to what sets you for a new trajectory, post-career, post-military. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. And it was, I was lucky, in a lot of ways. When I lived with some family friends for a while, when at first I was kind of going off the bus, and then that didn't work, and I ended up going into this family. This is when I was still young.
Okay, this is when you're still young.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But then there was a Marine as well who was a major. His name was Michael Johnson, and his family took me in for the last year when I was 16 to 17, and then I just kind of took off, went and did my own thing, got my own job, and worked a little restaurant. But they really took me in, and he was, again, one of those people. He was a no nonsense. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was a major in the Marine Corps. He was a Mustang officer, and he didn't really mince words with me or put up with much. But the thing that was different about the Marine Corps was, instead of just getting beat up, which I felt like I was pretty good at, taking a licking and keep on ticking, like the old Timex watch, it was this sense that there's room for one more if you mean business. If you're willing to give it your all, we will meet you more than halfway to make sure you get to where you want to go. It's only when you give up that you're done. And I never gave up my life. There was no point of giving up, even at the worst, darkest point. And the Marine Corps really has a way of shaping that. I don't know if everybody has the same experience Dan and I did going through the military, but it truly was transformational. I mean, boot camp did more for me than any therapy or priest or well-meaning family member, because it really was the great equalizer. There's the distance. It's 3 miles. We're all running there. Who gets there first?
Right.
And it's like, or whatever it is that you're doing. Hey, we're in recon in-dock day, and we're not stopping till we lose half of the people that tried out. That's not a distance.
It is a great equalizer.
It's a will. It's
right.
A pure will thing.
Well, and it's also a great level setter, right? Once they tear you down and build you back up, and the military standards, and you've got some brothers and sisters you can lean on, and then you get to your first duty station and learn then you learn that kind of the professional side, meaning the skill side of the military. And then it sounds like you had some great support there. So I'd love to dive. I bet you got let's face it, all Marines have better stories than what we have sometimes in the Air Force where I served. But when did you get out? What year? Kind of give us a backdrop, because I want to talk about your transition next. What year did you get out?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I came off active duty in August of 2001. And then aligned myself with a reserve battalion, 4th LAV battalion out of Northern Virginia. And we all know what happened not even a month later. It was September 11th happened. And I fully expected to get activated, called back up. I'd done my 6+ years, but I was ready to go. And it was, for whatever reason, that battalion was not on the mobilization plan, and we didn't go anywhere. And so I ended up having a very I don't know what you would call it, non-combative career in the Marine Corps. But when you train for something for 6 years and you're ready to go, it was like, I remember calling the base up at Quantico and saying, hey, it's Sergeant Wilkins, you guys ready for me? And they're like, we're good. We'll call you if we need you. And it's like, no, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play, and it was this weird dynamic where, and I would tell you that in a different way, and I've got a chance to work with probably close to 1,000 veterans now over the last couple of years. And that transition out is hard in ways that we cannot imagine. And that loss of identity was a big one for me. And it is for a lot of the guys that I work with. And they underestimate that when they leave active duty. I did. And I found myself right back to being, and I hate to say it this way, but I found myself back in the place of being a frightened 15-year-old boy and I don't know where to put my hands.
Right. Yeah.
You just took my uniform, you took my rank, you took my sense of purpose, you took my dignity. And here I am back in the world, and all of a sudden they don't care. They don't know anything about what I did, and they don't know how to translate it. You know, and what do you do with a former admin / combat journalist who was deployed with artillery so he can blow shit up and write a story about it? There's not a whole lot of big career civilian path for that.
Right. Now, I think I can definitely relate to that from my own journey. I think a lot of folks that we've interviewed and just network and talk with that also have had struggles for different reasons in their transition could relate to that. Dan, from your perspective, what did you hear there, and how does it resonate with you?
Well, I think the interesting thing is it is going to be an impact. It is going to be a change. I think I'm jumping questions that we had planned, but I'll go there anyway. When one of Raleigh's sales platoon members called me, he got in touch and he said, "Have you got any advice for when I transition?" And I said, "Well, in many ways I was lucky. I can say that now. At the time, I'd always wanted to go and be a career officer in the Royal Engineers, and they said, "We'll be honored if you become one of our officers." And I was like, "Wow, this is a 400-year-old, 500-year-old organization saying, come on in." And I mucked up that assessment. So basically, I ended up staying as a non-commissioned officer, and continued my career. I've been with my software company, ESCO, 23 years. So my transition happened every weekend or every couple of weeks when I was away with the Army back to civilian. I got used to doing it a lot. And even if just transitioning from weekends or 2-week periods, which I did all the time, even there, I've sort of come back and be like, I've got to change my head. They don't understand what I've just been through. They don't understand what I've just achieved and how much time and effort and just how difficult that really was. And conversely, the folks in the military, they don't understand the complexity and some of the size of these projects and deals and global technology projects I'm working on. So sometimes there is overlap. I think what Raleigh said is, you do build up a lot of identity, a lot of self-worth, a lot of the belief in yourself is through what you do in the military, and you get to wear that on your uniform, your rank, and people knowing, well, where you served, what course you've been, or what you've achieved, and suddenly you're naked, and I think, I guess the big question is, how do you prepare for that?
Right.
Skills that you can take to the civilian world.
Yep.
Do you build your resume and look at, well, what have I done? And this is where I would give a plug out to David Goggins and say, anybody who hasn't read the book and gone through the exercise, he actually makes you sort of go through that and say, what were the things, the obstacles I've overcome in my life? Yep. The things I've done that I've really achieved. I think that might force veterans to really think about that stuff, and they'll be better prepared for the interview in Civilian Street.
So that's a perfect segue. So beyond reading David Goggins' book, which I'm going to have to add to my list.
You'll be doing workouts at 4 a.m.
Yeah, you will.
That guy's a beast.
So Raleigh, what else, before we start talking about sales platoon here, if you had a room full of folks that were getting ready to transition or already have started to transition, what's some advice you'd give them?
And I get to have this, it's a loaded question away, because one of the few people probably that gets to have a couple hundred conversations every quarter with veterans. I had over 100 conversations in the last several weeks. It was packed, 12, 14 conversations in a row.
Wow.
With veterans that are coming off active duty, and all ranks, E3 to 06, so from Lance Corporal to full bird colonel. And essentially the first thing that I have to do is I try to think about what they're hearing in the market, and then I try to give them some ground truth, right? Military term. What's the straight scoop on what you need to know? And I try to push a lot of myths and misconceptions out of the way. And the biggest misconception, so the biggest thing people think is they go, oh, military leadership. And they come out and they tell them all to put military leadership on their resume. And I can tell you now, this is a guy who spent 20 years in the civilian world. I'm not impressed with your military leadership. You ran an organization with people that couldn't quit, that were subject to the UCMJ, that had Article 686 and Article 92. They lose their rank if they mouth off to superior officer. If they don't show up, you can come get them with the MPs, drag them out of bed and take them to work in the morning. I'm not impressed any more than you would be impressed by an SVP of operations for Amazon and all they had done and put them in charge of 1st Marine Expeditionary Force supply lines. There's a disconnect there, and no one talks about it. They want to pretend like, oh, it's a direct transition. Well, it's not a direct transition, because when you come off active duty, there's no rank structure. There's no uniform. There's no Dan's a director, so Dan is the same thing as an 05. Well, no, that's not the way the civilian world works. Sometimes he's like an E1, and sometimes he's like an 09. And learning that is a hard lesson the longer they've been in. And the reason is there's only 3 things that separate our military from the civilian world. I try my best, from the cook in the Marine Corps to the Navy SEAL. What do we all have in common? And the only things I can come up with are boot camp, uniform, and the UCMJ. and boot camp, we all went to boot camp. Everybody had to go through transformational. And why that's important to think about is when you went to boot camp, it was 6 to 14 weeks of learning mission, then team, then self. And you learn to set aside the mantle of self-worth that every Susie sorority and Frankie fraternity has spent 4 years building.
Right.
And so you're coming at every problem set from a completely different point of view. And the longer you're in, the harder it is. Then the rank structure, obviously uniform, you know where you stand in a very complex organizational unit. And then finally, the UCMJ is, I tell people, it's like being a U.S. citizen, except you voluntarily give away half your rights and all your freedom.
Right.
So
and it feels,
you can't be what you want.
It can feel like a lot more than half at certain points. Well,
if that makes sense. So
yes, I know we're just scraping the surface. There's so much more given what you do in terms of transition advice. We'll have to have you back on. But Dan, I want to start talking about sales platoon, because that's where Dan, you put Raleigh on my radar at least. And as we talked pre-show, I wish I had Raleigh Wilkins back when I separated out of the Air Force in 2002. So Dan, why don't we start talking about sales platoon? What do you think?
Well, I think we should go the Simon Sinek route.
Okay, yeah.
I nearly used the American term route. I'm going to use the British term route. So why did you do it? What propelled you to do it? What were you trying to get out of creating this organization that trains up veterans to go into a career in sales? Why did you go about it? Perhaps this was an evolution, perhaps something you've been thinking about for a while. Tell us your why. Why did you do it? What was your why? Why now? Yeah. Why are you doing it?
Yeah, well, I'll do my best not to turn into an advertisement, as you guys say in Britain, instead of an advertisement, which we say here in the South. But
commercial,
commercial, advertisement, whatever. But yeah, the why came to be over a period of time. So when I came off active duty, it took me a few years to find my way into corporate America, and then it took me about a year from there to find my way into a sales role. And I was an accidental salesperson in corporate America. I was not the prototypical, 4-year degree guy who comes out and goes and gets an AE role. I was the former U.S. Marine who came out as an executive assistant, who went into marketing, finished his degree, and then went into sales. And I failed at it. And it was weird because I was really successful as vacuum salesman when I was on active duty. I sold Kirby vacuums door to door.
Wow.
Yeah, but that does not translate to the corporate world. And the main reason is, as you guys know, when you're selling to corporate, every human being buys things because it's what the product is going to do for me. It doesn't matter what the product does, it's what is it going to do for me. And that's as true for a man at home that's doing his vacuuming as it is for a woman CEO who's deciding which accounts payable software to use. Dan. So, it's, trying to figure that out. But so I failed at it, not realizing that there was a science to business selling that was much deeper and ingrained and much more aligned with my military service than I'd even realized, whether it was after action reports, BAMSIS, 5-paragraph orders, SMEAC, all these different acronyms we use in the military when we're doing war fighting and war planning. They translate very well to the sales world, because you got recon, you got to do all your different analysis, you have to do your research, then you have to use persuasion. You have, you don't have rank to use when you're in sales, but you have to have influence. Well, that sounds a lot like being an NCO. And so there's a lot there that I didn't know. I had to fail. I had to get really, really bad at it. And I was like number 495 out of 500 of the B2B salespeople at T-Mobile in Bethesda, Maryland, and ready to get fired. Probably the only reason I get fired is the other 4 worst people in the company were on my team. And so I looked better than them, but it wasn't saying much. And so, but I think because I wasn't the best natural B2B salesperson, it gave me a respect for process and the science of it, and the numbers of it, that there is a pathway to learn. And essentially the day that I learned what that was and started applying it through a bunch of different books, Stephen Shiffin's Cold Calling Basics, Miller Hyman was really big back then, PSS, I became a student of sales. Sandler, which I know you're a fan of, Dan. And, and I became a student. I started to apply it in the laboratory of life. And it's very similar to like the laboratory of learning to fight. If you've never fought before, it's like, it doesn't make sense. A lot of the things you do are counterintuitive. Leaning in when you want to retreat, attacking through an ambush. They're all counterintuitive things you learn. Sales is a lot like that. And in doing those things, I went from number 495 to the top 5 within a year, from making $40,000 a year to well over $200,000 a year. And I knew that I would never go hungry again. And I knew that I'd found a pathway that was the great equalizer, because it was the world's last meritocracy. They didn't care that I didn't go to a good school. They don't care that I was older than everybody else on the team. They didn't care. It was, what can you do today? What did you do the last 30 days for our organization? And I realized then that sales as a profession was very misunderstood. And that the second piece was that there was a group of people that were salespeople within it that were just as astute group of professionals as being an engineer and architect. And I said, if I'm going to do this, because at the time I want to go back to school and be a maritime lawyer. And I said, if I want to commit to this instead of going back to law school, I want to professionalize sales the same way that those other industries like architecture have been professionalized. And it was a pure calling in me. In the next 20 years, I spent working my way in building teams. And Sales Platoon was a natural evolution of that, because my favorite part of, and I know I'm talking a lot, but my favorite, one of my favorite stories, I got called into this company. So I was a manager and a director and a senior director, and I got brought in to turn around this company. And there was 3 guys that I was told needed to go. And I'm not going to mention the company or the guys' names, because it would be fair to them, because they're still very active. But I went into the company I was doing this, and I said, I always had the belief whenever I took over command, or, new corporal, new sergeant, whatever in a place, and I inherited people, I'd say, look, here's a straight dope. Here's what I heard about you. I don't know you. You don't know me. So you got a blank slate with me. We got 30 days to figure this out. And so I got to sit down with those guys. And it was when I started making that transition from, I want to make as much money as I can and get as high as I can in the organization, to how many people can I develop? And I put those 3 people on a plan. I gave them the option. I said, it's Thursday afternoon. Don't tell me today. Come back on Monday. And it's up to you. If you want to, I'm going to get really involved in your life for the next 90 days. Or you can come back on Monday and tell me you don't want me to get involved, and that's fine. I won't fire you. You're doing me a service by letting me know you're retired on active duty. I will continue to pay you out for the next 90 days, and you go find your next role. And 2 of the 3 took me up on that offer. And I got really involved in their lives. And 2 of those guys, they both became team leads, later managers, then directors and senior directors. And now they have teams and sales careers of their own. And I realized that because maybe of all those struggles, I had a unique ability to reach a diverse group of people and teach them what I had learned, and then transform their lives. And that was the seeds for what became 10 years before Sales Platoon became Sales Platoon, which is, I would say, hey, go to my recruiting agent and I would say, hey, give me a stack of the resumes you've rejected in the last 30 days, because I knew I was going to find my Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard in there. because they don't have any sales experience. Why would you bring them into a sales role? But if they even applied, they've got a thought process that I want to meet with.
Mm.
And we started building those onboarding programs. And so over 10 years, I started doing it.
So go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was going to say, you started to describe there what sales platoon is, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, folks may not actually realize exactly what sales platoon is. I mean, I hinted earlier and explained it's a conduit for folks to move from the military into sales. But could you put it in words and describe what you're doing now? What is sales platoon?
Yeah. So sales platoon is a transformational program designed for active duty military and especially soon to separate veterans who are leaving active duty, and they're interested in but don't know how to break into corporate sales. And I am of the belief, which I know you are, Dan, and I believe Scott would be of this belief too. He can contradict us if not. That sales is more of an apprenticeship than it is a study course. You can watch all the YouTube videos and read all the books in the world you want on how to be a great golfer, but until you go to the range and try to hit that ball, you don't know a damn thing about golf. And until you, the first time, go out in there, try to sell and apply the things, it's like the difference between playing a first-person shooter game and being a Navy SEAL deployed in a forward combat theater of war. It's like they're two totally different things. So I designed a program that was 12 weeks to 6 months long, a true apprenticeship where they're with us full time. It's 160 hours of instructionally designed material, but it's teach, enable, do. So by week 4, they're on the phones calling in to people like you and C-levels in Fortune 5,000 companies and able to secure appointments and start to learn how to sell by doing it, by being part of a team and using discover.org and HubSpot and all the other tools of the trade, Zoom Info and Connect and Sell, which we use. But that was the idea, is what's that first 90 days that I really is the crucible you want to put people through when they're new in your organization, because it takes that long for them to get the product line and understand, can they learn to sell? And can I take that off the plate of a corporation where they don't have to do that? It's not a guesswork whether these people can learn to sell. They already know. Does that make sense?
It does. So question for you. So do you work directly at what I'm hearing with organizations that hire sales platoon to help improve and probably diversify their sourcing of sales talent? I'm hearing that channel. And then I'm also assuming you work with individuals that come across sales platoon and say, hey, I want to get into this highly lucrative career of selling. Can you work with me? So you work in both of those channels, Raleigh, is that right?
Yeah, so it's an interesting model, and everybody that has heard it before it became successful told me it wasn't possible to do it that way. I don't charge the veteran and never will. I don't take their GI Bill. We're not a nonprofit, and I don't take money from the government. So they're like, well, how do you make money? And I said, I help companies make money. And they said, well, how do you help companies make money? And I said, how's Susie Sorority and Frankie Fraternity doing statistically when you hire them into your sales organization? How many of them, how good are you at hiring, recruiting, sourcing, grit, determination, resiliency, and past experience when you're taking raw talent? And the answer is it's 50-50 at best. I mean, some companies like Dan's great. He's got an amazing program and he's a little better than the average bear, a lot better than the average bear, but they'll train and they bring them on. Most companies, they really struggle with think about the burden you put on the average recruiter. What you're saying, if you're a sales leader and you go to recruiters, you're saying, I want you to go and find me the next PGA Tour star, but you can only hire people onto the PGA who have never played golf before. And based on the way they wrestle and play football, you got to determine right now, are they going to be good on the PGA? Because as soon as you hire them, we're going to put them on the course. And that's what sales is like.
Right.
The day you start playing golf, you're on the PGA Tour and you're getting evaluated, metric, rated, and people can't deal with that.
Right. You better be hitting those drives. You better be rolling those big money putts in. So I love the fact what I heard there. You never charge the veterans. You don't take the benefits. You don't charge the government. You focus. You monetize the business based on the results that you're producing with the companies that you're working with. I love that. And my understanding is that's how you and Dan met. So Dan, tee that up and let's what have been your experiences with Raleigh?
Well, I think the way we met is, I think it was Devon.
Yep.
Picked up two of Raleigh's troops, airmen, two former airmen, and one of them hit me up, just contacted me on LinkedIn, and then he called me, and he was asking for some advice. That's a very interesting approach. It's not, I'm trying to sell you something. He was just trying to ask for some advice. And I thought about it and thought, well, okay, fair enough. I could probably cut a few minutes to give him a little bit of advice. And he went back to, well, what was your transition like? And he said, I'm trying to get into sales, and can I get some advice off you? I'm like, okay. So we had a chat. Liked the guy. We had a chat, and he followed up, and he said, I'm going to send you this. And this is really what I'm up to, and trying to sort of grow my knowledge and awareness of sales, and open up a position so I can go into sales. Here's why I was done with the military. I'd reached the point where I wanted to leave, wanted to grow and develop further. Yeah, I like this. As Raleigh was just talking there about taking folks, growing them, developing them, giving them the opportunity to achieve dreams they didn't think was possible. That's the cool thing about sales. Back in Wisconsin recently, and one of my guys, I'm taking you out to my land, we're gonna go fly fish. Cool, I like to fly fish. First thing he does, he says, I want to thank you. For what? He said, this wouldn't have been possible without you. I says, all I did was, you brought the effort, the graft, the determination, the study, and the application. All I did was open the door. Now and again, tweaked you, adjusted you, so I think what Raleigh's tapped into as a sales leader, yeah, we're busy, but yeah, it's so, I think, depending on how you're wired, for me, it's so rewarding to see people develop and grow, and then we keep training them and developing them, and often they bring back ideas and more content, and you get this multiplier effect. And that's what I'm seeing both with certainly the two guys that we brought in from Raleigh's organization, is they came in hungry, humble, and they raised the bar a little bit. Certainly they raised the bar of effort. It's like, hey, we don't know this space, we've learned some things from Raleigh, but we'll bring our A game every day. So that's how we got connected. One of Raleigh's veterans reached out and had a chat with me. And then it was compelling, and I was like, well, yeah, okay. He's like, would you have a chat with our founder? I'm like, yeah, that sounds interesting.
That is that's what a great testimony, and it really speaks to the value of what the organization and the methodology and the system that you've built, Raleigh, and I love it. And so, veterans, if you're listening, folks in transition, well, I'll tell you what, instead of me saying it, Raleigh, for veterans and for whoever's listening, from a individual candidate standpoint, who do you look for to reach out, maybe get into your system, your database, what have you?
Yeah, ideally, you're going to have at least 90 days left on your service, because we are authorized through DoD Skill Bridge. It's entitlement. If you don't even know you have it, if you served active duty for 180 days minimum, then you have an entitlement where up to your last 180 days, the government will TAD, temporarily assign you to a company to learn a trade. And so we are authorized, one of the few companies that does what we do, that's authorized to the DoD to train you and take you. And she can be with us up to 6 months before you leave active duty, where we can really train and get you up to speed. The second thing is, don't get locked into your MOS, your job code. I don't remember everybody calling me aside and saying, Raleigh, what would fulfill you to be a Marine? What would you like to do? They're like, no, here's your test. Here's what you scored. Here's what you're going to do, And then no one along the way was like, does this fulfill you? Do you feel more of a, nobody cared. It's like, just show up, shut up, and do your job. So there's plenty of wrench turners and aircraft mechanics and infantry and artillery and, guys and girls who you're not even thinking about sales, because you think of sales as the person that knocks on your door at 5 o'clock and wants to put solar panels on your roof or annoys you when you're trying to buy a pair of dress shoes. You're not thinking about, how does a company like Esker get its product out in front of executives? How do you become a game changer and a change agent? And most times when I talk to us military folks, they think, oh, I got to go into operations or logistics, because that's where you do the planning in the military. That's not where the planning occurs in the civilian world. The real planning and change occurs in the sales and revenue ops world. But we don't know about that in the military. So, read some books, get to know, listen to some people, is steer away from if they're real popular and they got like 3 million followers, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay. It's just, they're really good at talking, but most of it's not applicable. Find like the guys that are doing stuff like what he did. He found Dan, right? Here's a former British Royal Army guy, you know, and I'm going to call him up and ask him a question about how he got to where he is. Hell, so, you know, that's how you find your way into stuff. Find somebody that's doing it, not somebody's
Right.
talking about it.
Love that.
Well-
That is great advice, even outside of sales. Dan, you were going to add something there?
Yeah, you know, there's a good Southerner I know very well. He's a guy who's written a numerous number of books, Jeb Blunt. Anybody?
Oh, yeah, well, he's a different. Yeah, he's actually a good guy.
Anybody who's, I mean, there's a guy who can do it all, and very humble. Got an engine like nobody I know. Wasn't in the military. He could have easily been in the military. But anybody who really wants to sort of get the real, you know, there's a difference between reading the book with theory and reading the book where, hey, this guy, I use the things he does, I say the things he says, and it works. I'd go read some of Jeb Blunt's books. Fanatical Prospecting is good. EQ for Sales, because emotional intelligence and empathy and the ability to really listen, these are key. And I think that could be a barrier. Folks in the civilian world might be thinking, oh, I don't know, can this person come in and both do project management and really apply empathy and EQ and listening skills? I met some people in the military. One of my warrant officers was a paratrooper. Formerly, he was Corps of Royal Engineers, but 5'9", sorry, I'm getting 9 parachute squadron. So super fit. He could pass the army fitness test running backwards. True story. He did it. He ran backwards for a mile and a half and beat a lot of people and passed. He did it for a joke. But the best man management skills, some of the best man management skills I've ever seen. So sometimes I think we have this perspective that they may not have, you know, the EQ, the empathy, the listening, the emotional skills. These are all key skills for sales. So anybody in the veterans, any veterans thinking about getting out, take a look at some of the Jeb Blunt stuff. EQ for Sales is especially good.
EQ for Sales. We'll try to include the link to that as well as some of those other things y'all both have mentioned. So I love the model. I love Sales Platoon. Drinking the Kool-Aid because I love kind of how your approach as well. As much as I believe that our fellow veterans, you know, there's plenty of things that they are carved out of because of this unconscious bias, because of these assumptions that folks make about what their abilities are, what their potential is. And I love how Sales Platoon, in one aspect of that, is fighting back against that. So excellent work, Raleigh. I really appreciate the fact you spent, you know, as busy as you are, you spent some time with us, you and Dan. For the sake of time, we're not gonna be able to do this justice, but you know, you're also a fellow entrepreneur, fellow founder. And as we were talking pre-show, there's a plethora, and I think it's a beautiful thing. There's a plethora of military entrepreneurialism, and for that matter, military spouse and significant other entrepreneurialism. Big shout out to our friends at Spousely. If y'all are new to that, it's like a marketplace for military entrepreneurs and like product creators and stuff. But y'all check that out. But speak to Riley, speak to want to be founders, whether they're veterans or not. In a small nutshell, what's one or two pieces of advice there?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, we could spend a whole podcast episode just touching into that. Don't underestimate the power of your network that you have, and starting to develop that before you leave, because you're going to need those mentors. You know, the military, we take people, you know, and we transform them, and we don't hire civilian contractors to go to Paris Island and make Marines. We have Marines make Marines. So when you're doing your transition and you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, by God, get to know some. You know, don't rely on your TAP officer or a well-meaning book author to help you, because the hardest piece of coming out of the military from any of the things is when you go to become an entrepreneur, every company only has one purpose, and that is to produce a revenue or profit, period. It might have moralistic property, it might have a why that's deeper than that, but if I don't produce revenue for Sales Platoon, it doesn't exist. There is no money bucket to go get. So I have to produce revenue for Dan's company, for other companies, or otherwise it's just a charity. And so if you're going to be an entrepreneur, realize that for whatever years you were in the military, 4, 8, 12, 20, 30 years, you were never responsible for creating revenue. you're responsible for allocating revenue. And so when you go become an entrepreneur, you really need to understand how to do sales. And for most people that come out that want to be entrepreneurs, and they're in the military, I say their biggest handicap is they don't know how to raise and create capital. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he's got a great program, but he can't articulate the value of that program to a CEO, and therefore everybody's saying, we love what you're saying, but they don't know how to buy from him. And that's the thing, you have to be able to, and that's just realizing that, I think, is one of those things that revenue creation is not something that comes naturally. It's a difference between managing a budget and creating the budget.
Right. Right. Well, as we all know, in uniform, the 1st and the 15th, like clockwork, right? That paycheck, the LES statement that was coming, and you never had to worry about that. Although there were some visits I'd like to forget over working with the folks in military pay. But hey, I'm not throwing stones. They had a tough job. But as an entrepreneur, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. If I could just add one more thing to a little tidbit, and I know we could spend a week talking about this, but I think it's really important. I think what's illustrated right here in this conversation is if you're looking for a mentor or an advisor as a potential founder, as a potential entrepreneur, be very judicious of who you seek counsel from, especially who you pay any kind of consulting fees to. There's lots of folks, going back to something I think Raleigh said, Dan may have alluded to it as well. There's a lot of folks that talk about it, and then there's folks that do it, and they've got the results and the businesses that they've built, potentially, perhaps exited. And those are the folks that have been there and done it, a real deal Holyfield, you want to get advice from. So veterans, service members, just be very judicious. And that's where vets2industry.org can come into play, because they vet a lot of these things. So you can check out the resources there. All right. So I know we're just scratching the surface, and I love the passion between Raleigh and Dan. Man, we could fuel city blocks on the passion and the action here. But Raleigh, how can folks, as we start to wrap here, how can folks connect with you and Sales Platoon, whether they're a company interested in working with you, whether they're a veteran, airman, soldier, Marine, seaman, you name it, or anyone else that's interested? How can they connect with you?
Yeah. Well, they can go to our website. We do have a website, mysalesplatoon.com, salesplatoon.com, salesplatoon.org. I bought them all as we did it. So I got them all snatched up now. But yeah, they can go to the site, and there's a lot of information on there. If you're a civilian employer, there's a lot of information about how many veterans are coming off active duty, and some good information on tax credits. And what you can, like, most companies, myself included, as a VP of sales, didn't even know there was the workforce opportunity tax credit, where if you bring somebody in from active duty, you get a minimum of $5,400 up to $9,600 in tax credits. So, and that's been around since World War II, but most companies aren't able to take advantage of it because they didn't know that, they didn't know, and number two, they didn't have a way to capture it. So, but our site has a lot of information on it. It's not a very good sales site. I hate to say that as a sales guy. I basically created it myself, and I'm not a web developer, and we're getting better. We're investing some money in it, but you can fill out if you're a veteran, you can find me on Veterati, which is another great resource for veterans, free resource. But if you go there, there's a link to my calendar, and if the date's open, it belongs to you. And just like Dan gave his time, to two young guys in our platoon, I give my time. And, I can help tell you about my career, how I got where I was. And if you're interested in Sales Platoon, we'll see if we can get those dates to align. I mean, we're authorized nationwide as a DoD skill bridge program. We're going to soon be the first Department of Labor apprenticeship approval, national standards and accreditation. So we're in final stage review there. There's a lot that we can do to help you and get you into our program. So there's both sides of that. If you're an employer looking to hire military sales talent, then there's nowhere else to go. So and I hate to sound that, but it's
you're a trailblazer. One final question, just to clarify for me, and sometimes I'm a little bit slow on the uptake, as old Greg White likes to say. But is veteran status required to be part of the program?
Yeah, so you do have to be military at the moment. We're looking at as we go deeper, I certainly have an affinity for our professional athletes coming out. And there's a friend of mine, Nosa Eeg, started a company called Prolific Company that works with that, the NFL and NHL and the, professional sports leagues, because again, the average professional athlete, they're kind of in that same dilemma. They're going to go spend 5, 6, 7 years making 300,000, 400,000 a year, league minimum, and then they're going to be on their tail at 30 years old with no skill set, no training, but a hell of a lot of discipline, drive, determination. So we have a sisterhood, brotherhood with them type of companies, but we got a shoemaker stick to thy last. I try to stick with our veterans, and it's not that we couldn't train salespeople. It's just, I mean, Dan had me come out and I spent some time with his team. I can share things from my own experience. I have 20 years sales experience, but we stick with veterans. You do need to be a veteran or a military spouse. We will take a few military spouses as well, in each cohort. So.
Love it. We've been talking with Raleigh Wilkins, founder and CRO with Sales Platoon. What a outstanding program. So, hey, veterans, military members, military spouses, or companies looking to get more successful at their sales hires, be sure to check out Sales Platoon and give Raleigh. And Raleigh, I'm assuming you're across social media as well beyond the website, right?
Yep. Oh yeah, we're up on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm a little slow adopter to it. I'm a little in that age group that we're up there. We put our graduations up on our Facebook and in Instagram and LinkedIn. You can find us pretty well. So
wonderful. And we're going to make it easy. In the show notes of this episode, you're going to be able to be one click away from Raleigh and Sales Platoon. So I really appreciate that. Raleigh, really appreciate your time. Dan, don't go anywhere. I'm about to ask you your favorite takeaway here. But Raleigh, I really appreciate how unique this program is, how it plugs a gap, how it fights through some of the just human assumptions. Like we all make them. It's that unconscious bias is out there, whether you like it or not, I believe. So I really appreciate what your organization's doing, and congrats for continued exceptional growth. So really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
All right. So Dan, before we let Raleigh lead, before I close, what is your favorite thing that Raleigh has shared here today about Sales Platoon?
I think he's reminded us that one of the things that veterans bring to the table is grit, determination, the ability to bounce back and just get on with it. And, one of a good friend of mine, he's one of the reps in my sales organization, and I enjoy supporting him. We've worked together for 23 years, and he wasn't in the military, but he has the ability to bounce back. He can lose $1 million deal, or if for some reason it gets cancelled or paused or stalled, he can bounce back within a half a day. It's incredible. Now, he may have worked on that thing for 1 or 2 years, but he can apply gratitude. He can bounce back. I think that's what many veterans have to bring to the table. I've been through tougher times. I've worked hard. I'm determined. I'm disciplined. I'll study and I'll apply. And they have grit. And so that all of that, and you wrap all that up, and the ability to bounce back when things don't go exactly as expected. I think that's what many veterans can bring, if those veterans are also willing to say, right, I am a rookie. I would certainly encourage them to be reading books and watching if this is the path they want to go in. But they also have to come in and go and sort of accept, okay, I'm no longer an 06 or a captain or whatever. I'm starting from the bottom.
Right.
And the more humble they can be, and the more curious they can be, and the more they can show that drive, but through empathy and humility, they can do really well. And so this is definitely a way where, dare I say it, we've got people in sales making more than 06 and 06s, in sales, and
they don't have to wear uniforms.
No,
that's right.
Or shave, baby, some days.
Right.
Well, hey,
that's right.
Dan, a pleasure. I appreciate deeds, not words, with Dan. I mean, we've been collaborating now. It feels like a year and a half, maybe, and you live what you preach, and I admire that, Dan, and I love how you find ways of uplifting the veteran community here. So really appreciate. So Dan, let's make sure we close the loop with you. How can folks connect with you, Dan Reeve and Esker?
Yeah, folks can find esker.com. That's ESKER.com. And you'll find me, Dan Reeve, or you'll find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Reeve at esker.com.
Wonderful. All right. Big thanks to Raleigh Wilkins with Sales Platoon. Of course, my special co-host here today, Dan Reeve with Esker. Make sure y'all connect with them. Their information will be in the show notes. Hey, to our listeners, hopefully y'all have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I've learned a lot of new things. it's always neat to sit down and rub elbows with a trailblazer that's addressing a gap in the market that's existed for quite some time. So make sure you connect with Raleigh. Also connect with, we've mentioned vets2industry.org, tons of resources, oftentimes vetted resources there. Brian Arrington does a great job and the whole team there. Be sure to check out our sponsors for this episode, buyersmeetingpoint.com, Kelly Barner over there, and of course, Dial P for procurement. Big thanks for their support. On behalf of our entire team here at Veteran Voices and Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton signing off for now. But hey, challenging you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time right here on Veteran Voices. Thanks, everybody.